Good morning. If you want to grab your seats, if you've not done so already, my name is Tim, and we're going to spend the next few minutes looking at the Bible together. Happy Advent. Today is the first Sunday in Advent, in a sort of Christian way of thinking about the world, I suppose. It's Happy New Year today as well. It's blank faces. That's not how anyone is feeling, but still, it is Happy New Year. Advent, I suppose, the Christian season of awaiting and hoping Christ's return. But we do that by thinking towards when we celebrate his first coming. We do that by thinking towards Christmas. So we're going to spend the next 4 weeks in the book of Isaiah, who is a prophet who wrote something like 700 years before Jesus, about 2,700 years ago, who predicted that the Lord would come and tells us much about what he came to do. So this morning we're going to be in Isaiah chapter 6. If you've got a Bible with you, it'll help you to turn there. But if you haven't, don't worry. It'll be, in fact, as you can already see, it will be on the screens on either side of me. So I'm going to read Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up. And the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. What have I walked in front of that I shouldn't have done? No, not that. Okay. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, your sin atoned for." And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Then I said, "Here I am, send me." And he said, "Go, say this to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull." I mean, at this point, you're really wondering what this Christmas message of hope you were promised on the social media was. But we will get there. "Make the heart of this people dull, and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." Then I said, "How long, O Lord?" And he said, "Until cities lie waste without inhabitants, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste, and the Lord removes peoples far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump." I mean, you're still wondering where, I imagine, where the message of hope is. But, I mean, it's a strange scene. It's not immediately obviously Christmassy. The stuff we'll get to later in Isaiah, I think, for many, will ring more like the season. I mean, we're not told exactly where Isaiah is when this starts, but something happens to him in what I suspect is a fairly ordinary day. So picture it like this. You're still at the sink. You're washing up. Maybe you put your tree up yesterday because you're eager. Some of you would hate that idea, but you did yesterday. You put your tree up, you got your lights up, you got your decks up, and you can see them from the sink. And you're sort of having that warm, fuzzy feeling, or trying to find it, that we associate with Christmas, and thinking, "Oh, isn't this all very nice?" And then the sky is torn away and everything is on fire and you're suddenly in the temple and you can see God. This is where Isaiah is at the start of what I started to read. His day has gone very sideways and everything looks very surprising. He's found himself in what seems to be a throne room. After all, we see a throne and a robe with a train, so a really big robe. And yet he's also in the temple, so he's imagining, I guess, in the most holy place of the Jewish temple. And then we're told that there are these figures that he can see. There's some sort of figure with a train on the throne that he can't quite make out with the smoke. But there are these figures he can see all around that were called seraphim or seraphs, who clearly have 6 wings. Who, if you start to get into a little bit of what the Bible describes about these figures in other places, you might want to call them angels. But I suspect if I say angel, you'll picture like a fat little baby or a man in glowing robes with some big wings. That's not what I think these guys look like that Isaiah can see in this temple with the throne and the train and the smoke and the fire and the terror. These figures that he can see with their 6 wings, if we look at a number of different Bible passages, I'm not going to turn to them, they seem to be, the best description I've got is these are winged fiery lightning serpents. Just let that sink in for a second. Winged fiery lightning serpents with 6 wings. They're like snakes made of fire, made of lightning with lots of wings. That is what he's seeing, or something a bit like that. It's scary and weird. I mean, other passages that describe them maybe also they may be covered in eyes and they might be shaped like a wheel. So I don't know how you picture that, but just try and grasp something like that, but not a bloke in a white robe with a couple of wings. That's not where we are. The weird, angelic things around the temple, and they're singing. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. What's all that about? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Sing the winged fiery lightning serpents one to the other in their complicated polyphonic chorus. What are they doing? I mean, to us, it just sounds like a song because we're repeating words. In the Hebrew language that this was first written in, they had a thing that they'd recognize where you put 2 words together to make it more intense. So you'd say, like if they wanted to say pure gold, they'd say gold, gold. If they wanted to say perfect peace, they'd say peace, peace. That's just how the language works. They double the word to intensify it. And we kind of don't have that. The closest I could think is the difference between going out and out, out. That's not really what it is. And as you can tell, I don't really look like someone who knows what going out, out is. So it's not quite like that. But anyway, the double words to intensify them. But here we find 3. We would think it's a song, we repeat words when we sing. That's not what a Hebrew speaker would hear. 3 words. Their language doesn't do that. The Bible never does that anywhere else in the whole of the Old Testament. Essentially, these winged fiery lightning serpents are stretching at the very edge of language to try and describe what God is like. Holy, holy, which would be like as holy as it gets, is not enough. So they have to put another one on. And what they're saying, a little bit like we were singing earlier, you are worthy. They're saying that God is beyond them. They're saying that God is different to them, that God is higher than them. These 6-winged, fiery lightning serpents that live in the heavens with immense power. Did you notice that what they do with their wings is that they have 2 to fly, but they have 2 for the purpose of covering their faces so that they can't see God because he is too holy for them. And 2 for covering their feet so that they would not go anywhere on their own, but only where the Lord sends them. They're saying God alone is God. That's what they're singing. He is very different to them. There's a writer called A.W. Tozer who said, God is as far above an archangel as above a caterpillar. It's like, if you think of the difference between me and a caterpillar, they're vast. And then me and an angel, I guess we think that's probably pretty vast as well. So the gap between them must be huge. He says the distance between each of them and God is the same. In that God is so high above, it makes no difference. Isaiah is greeted with these crazy figures and fire and smoke, and a Lord that he can't quite see in the midst of smoke. And the song is telling him, this one is much bigger than I. This one is much higher than I. I am not fit, perhaps, to approach him. So he's granted this vision of the heavens. Maybe a little bit like, I don't know, imagine you've gone to a concert. Someone you'd like to see, whoever that might be. And for some reason they're having a competition, and they pull a couple of people out and say, we've got some backstage passes. Do you want to come back and see what it's really like? And you're probably pretty excited. You want to go see these guys. And so you go backstage. Your overwhelming feeling would be one of delight, maybe a bit of fear, perhaps, what they're actually going to be like, but delight, joy. I get to go behind the curtain. I get to see what's really there. I get to go backstage. In some sense, Isaiah has been given a backstage pass because he's not just gone to heaven. It's like the edge of the world's been torn away, and he can see what reality is. He can see who the God in heaven who rules the world, what he's like. So you think he'd be delighted. I mean, he reacts a little bit like if you're invited backstage, you meet Taylor Swift, you get into her backstage, her dressing room, and you discover that her rider is winged fiery lightning serpents. He reacts a little bit like that, though more so. He's not happy. He says, verse 5, he gets to see God, and he says, woe is me, for I am lost. He's not delighted. I mean, if you ask me, how do I think I would be if I got to meet God? I'd want to say, wow, what an amazing thing that I get to meet the God that I love face to face. Won't that be glorious? It's not what Isaiah says. Woe is me, for I am lost, or silenced. I can't join in the song. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. He's undone. He thinks he's in trouble. Something about what he's seen has led him to go, I have a problem with the fact that I'm here. It is not going to go well for me if I stay. And the thing is, I think we might be the same. I doubt we really want to admit it, any of us. But if we were in that situation, we would do well to feel like Isaiah did. Consider your morning. How's it gone so far? I imagine ups and downs, all sorts of, probably all small, relatively, but a number of things will have gone well, some of them not so well. If you start to get honest with yourself, you were a bit ratty with someone else earlier. Maybe you judged so-and-so when you noticed how they were doing things not quite how you would have done it, or when your children didn't do what you wanted them to, or when your friend was really late and you wanted to walk here with them, or whatever it might be. Or that harshly spoken word earlier that if you're honest and reflect on it, you kind of wish you could take back. It wasn't quite reflective of what you wanted to say. Well, it kind of was reflective of exactly what you wanted to say, but you wish it wasn't. There would be things for all of us, even this morning, I am sure, that we could go, not perfect. I could probably have done better if I got another run at it. No, I'm not terrible. I'm sure there are loads of people out there who are much worse than me, and you all could think this, and I actually suspect that would be true. That we could also, I'm certainly not the worst person in the world by a very long margin, but there's still stuff I could have done differently. Things I could have done better. And then I think it would be quite a natural reaction to think, well, okay, nobody's perfect though, are they? Wasn't too bad, and on we go. I kind of think that's Isaiah's point. Nobody's perfect. Very few of us would think that perfection was something we were aiming at. And yet when you see God and see these crazy angels who are like, I can't even look at him in his perfection, you think, how can I go in there if I am not perfect like him? And that would be the right thing to think. So we're not perfect. I'm sure we could all own it. We're not terrible, I imagine. But the Bible's pretty clear that Sin is a lack of perfection, what it calls sin. And therefore, none of us would like to be called a sinner. I wouldn't. To have a lack of perfection is what that means. See, we're made to be in God's presence. We're made to be before him. We're supposed to be the people who can go into that crazy, fiery, smoky temple and go, this scary one who rules the world and made it, I can stand before him. But we can't. And Isaiah goes, in response. That's essentially what his words are. He's a bit more eloquent than that. But there's a problem. Like, he just knows in his being that it's like, something is bad here, and I need help, and I certainly cannot help myself. He doesn't ask for help, notice. He just is like, problem. I can't go any further. Woe is me. I think I'm about to die. Essentially it. It's like, I think probably what's going to happen next is I'm going to die, and I probably deserve it. I mean, I've never been there. I suspect none of us have, but that's a weighty thing to say. Then what happens? One of these winged fiery lightning serpents flies towards him holding a burning coal. I mean, this is the end, isn't it? This is all his fears realised. It's like, okay, well, maybe I deserve it. I still don't want it to happen. And he's going to be burned up. And then the angel reaches him with this coal in the tongs and puts it to his lips and pronounces forgiveness. Not that Isaiah was wrong, but that the Lord has taken away all the problems that he thought he had. Not that his assessment of the situation was wrong, but that the Lord has fixed it so that he can keep going. And notice that God's the one who takes the initiative. And then the angel comes towards him with this smoking coal from the altar, from this blazing fire, which when we read about it elsewhere in the Bible, seems to be God's anger against those who hurt him. And God's anger is not pushed to Isaiah's face, and yet it doesn't burn him. Instead, it fixes his problem. How's that work? How's that work? I mean, this passage doesn't tell us. Isaiah tells us later as he goes on that God sends his son as our willing champion to die on that altar, which turns out to be the cross, so that God's anger doesn't burn against us, but instead heals all the reasons that we deserve death. But here's the thing I'd like you to notice, because you may or may not agree with the assessment that Isaiah has of the situation, or that I do, but what I'd like you to notice is that Isaiah didn't do anything. What he said was, and then God fixed it. He saw his problem. I guess he cried out towards God, if that counts as doing something, to say, I have a problem, and then God fixed it. The way that Christians would put that, the way that we'd kind of badge that idea is we'd say God saves sinners. Not people who fix themselves up, not people who've got it right, not people who have sorted themselves out, not people who've lived lives that deserve being before God, but people who go, oh no, I'm in trouble. And then God saves them. It's the same for you and I. God takes the initiative. What do you have to do? So, I mean, most of us here, I recognise most of the faces, part of King's Church, already know Jesus. Some of you here might not. What would you do? Honestly, it starts exactly like Isaiah, saying, I have a problem, Jesus. Could you fix it? That's not the most eloquent prayer. Is enough of one for the Lord to come towards you. And we can fill in the gaps on the journey if you want to learn to follow him. But what about those of us who do follow him, which is most of the faces I can see? Well, this is where worship starts. I don't know if you've thought of it like that. Woe is me, God, would you come? Is worship. That's how it begins, anyway. That's a pretty good place to be. It's all right as well to move on to hallelujah, Jesus has saved me. It's pretty good too. But it's a good place to be. Woe is me, Lord, would you come? Because you'll find, friends, that he always does. Every single time, the Lord will come towards you and you'll discover that he loves you, which is a very surprising thing to find out about this big, scary king hidden behind fire and smoke, surrounded by snakes of flame and lightning. He loves you, and he wants you, and he's for you, and he always will be. And he will come towards you, and he'll keep doing so. And he'll do it all for you, and he'll rescue you and pick you up, and you'll discover the strange truth that actually where you're welcome, where you belong, is in this fiery, smoky place, because he'll call you his child, and children of kings belong in throne rooms. And you'll find that though the scary snakes have to hide their faces, we don't, because we're accepted by God, and he invites us all the way in. Which, I mean, it's the kind of stuff we say in church, but it's bonkers. I mean, it is actually bonkers. It takes forever for us to start to get this into our souls and truly believe it, but it's mad. The God who makes the world and rules everything wants you, and he wants you at his side. He's quite interested in what you think. He'd like to get your opinion. I mean, he'll do what he wants. He's God. But he'd like to get your opinion because he's interested in it, and then you're going to find out that he loves you. Sometimes he'll correct your opinion. Sometimes he'll go, that's a brilliant idea, I'm going to do that. But he loves you. He loves you. And then he says to Isaiah, could you go and do something for me? And Isaiah was like, yeah, I guess so. I don't know what I do. I thought I was going to die, and now I find out I'm a beloved son of the Most High God. Yeah, I guess I can do something. And he sends him off to preach, and he gives him this quite long sermon that I read out. That is the least encouraging sermon you've probably ever heard. Keep on hearing but do not understand, etc. Which is essentially he's describing how people will respond to Isaiah. That's what's going on. Isaiah is deliberately simple throughout his whole book. And he keeps getting simpler and simpler, and the people just reject it over and over again. God is saying, this is what's going to happen. Don't be too scared. Keep going, preach. But they're all going to reject you. And then Isaiah says, how long? How long will that go on for? And then God says, essentially quite a while, because he describes cities destroyed. Essentially the country that he lives in, a place called Judah, demolished, sent into exile. And Isaiah is dismayed. But there's a little seed of hope at the end. I don't know if you caught it when I read it. I'm just going to read verse 13 again. So this first bit, not so hopeful. And though a tenth remain in it, so 1 in every 10 are left in the country, it will be burned again, great, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it's felled. So not great news. But the holy seed is its stump. Which won't mean much to many of us, but there's a little bit of biblical imagery hidden in there. A phrase that's used a lot in the Bible, like a kernel of hope the size of a seed. Because it might sound like a small thing to say, but there's a bigger story. That every time in the Bible you hear about a seed, it's supposed to let us, kind of key us into the big story. I'm not going to tell you all of it. You might start looking at your watches, because I'm going to start with Adam and Eve, and you might think, gosh. Because we could go all the way through the Old Testament to tell this story, but we'll just do a couple of highlights. Right at the beginning, in the garden, Adam and Eve, they mess up. God is angry with them. He casts them out of the garden. And then he makes a promise to Eve. And he says that the seed of the woman, which is a strange thing to say because men have seed, not women, but the seed of the woman will one day crush the snake. So the snake has tricked them into disobeying God. The seed of the woman will one day crush the snake. Words to that effect. And then we keep hearing about this seed, sometimes hidden, sometimes not. But like there's a start, as soon as Eve gets that promise, there's a quest in the story. Be like, where is this one? This seed of the woman. Where are they? And it's almost like every character that comes up in the Old Testament gets held up against that standard. Some of them do quite well. They're not well enough, but quite well. Some of them do very badly. But it's almost like everyone we're looking at, it's like, is this them? Is this them? About every single character in the Old Testament. And those that fail tell us something about what they won't be like. And those that do well hint towards them, but they never go far enough, or it works in their lifetime, but they die. Where will be the one who will come who will end evil? That's the kind of big question. Where will be the one who will come who will make it so that people can be united with God, whatever might happen? Where are they? And Isaiah is saying that there is, after all of the terror of people who turn away from God and get what they ask for, that there's someone who's coming. Someone who's coming. And in Isaiah's day, they hadn't come. It took about 700 more years. After the promise was given some thousands of years before Isaiah. There is one coming. There is one coming. And we see enough good men and women who follow God try and fail that we start to wonder if any man or woman could ever be enough. If there could ever be a leader who could lead people to God. And we'd be right to wonder. And so God comes himself. Which is what Isaiah starts to tell us, as we'll see over the weeks to come. Just hints to start with, and then it comes clearer and clearer. God will come himself. That's what we celebrate at Christmas, that the Lord of hosts, who we've just seen in fire and smoke, with angels that look like snakes, that look like fire, that look like lightning, becomes a baby. We'll explore that more, I'm sure, over the coming weeks. That's a strange thought. But it's what happens. Become a baby who'll grow up to be a man who will be the only one who's ever lived who's perfect, and then die in our place, and then laugh in the face of death and walk it off. And then return to the heavens to sit in this throne room and continue to rule until he returns again to rule the world forevermore. That's what Christians call the gospel. That's the story that we believe and live and think changes everything that's ever happened. God will come. So Isaiah saw the face of God. He knew he was sunk. He knew the world was sunk. What's the solution? A child. God himself, who died and rose and is coming again. So the world's broken, friends. We can't fix it. We can make bits of it better. We can't fix it. We're broken. That's why the world's broken. And we can't fix that. What's the solution? God, who is high and mighty, stoops low enough to lift us up. Gets himself right down in the dust under our feet so that he can then carry us up into the heavens. All the way into Isaiah's vision. All the way into the throne room. Because God saves sinners. And God comes to the rescue. That's Christmas. This is your backstage pass to history, if you like. This is the drama that sits behind everything that has ever happened. And then we're invited to do what Isaiah does, if we'd like to call him king, to confess our sin, to have our lips burned, and discover that's a good thing. It doesn't hurt. Instead, welcomed into the fire of God, and then to wait for him to return. So the band are going to come now. We're going to sing. We're going to sing a kind of Advent hymn that you'll know, O come, Emmanuel, which sort of reaches back into some of these stories and is actually about waiting for Jesus to come again. It's sort of mournful but hopeful song. Because that's where we find ourselves. God has come and yet we're waiting still for everything to be fixed. God has come and we find ourselves rescued and yet the world is not all as it could be or should be. And so we hope and we wait and we find joy and we lament all at once. Because that's Christmas time. So should we stand and look to Jesus?